Hello friends, this is Natalia from Sava's Kitchen and I'm gonna share with you how to make this beautiful Eastern European 8-layer honey cake. First add honey and sugar and 1 stick of butter to the small pot, and we're gonna heat it over low heat until it just melts. It needs to be very warm. The sugar should be dissolved, but do not let the mixture boil. When it's hot enough, turn it off and add baking soda. You will see the mixture gonna foam a little bit. It means the soda reacts with the honey. Transfer it to the bowl so it cools down faster. And once it cools down a little bit, gonna add 3 eggs and whisk them really well. And that's basically it. Now you're gonna have to add flour and mix it into the dough, and that's all the work. So I start adding the flour gradually, first using the whisk. Once it becomes hard to use the whisk, I switch to the spatula and just scraping it off the walls of the bowl, so we use all the flour and it gets mixed in really well. And you're gonna need about 500-600 grams of flour, and it's important to add it gradually so you mix it in well and so you don't add too much. And as you can see, I added another maybe like half a cup of flour, and I continue mixing it. And when it's gonna be hard to mix, you take off the spatula and basically use your hands to mix and knead it a little bit. And be careful, once you add about like 500 grams, you can go ahead, wash your hands and dry them, and press onto the batter. And if it doesn't stick to your hands, it's pretty much ready. But if it's still very, very sticky, you may need to add a little bit more flour. The batter should be a little bit, the dough should be a little bit shaggy, but it should not be very sticky because you're gonna have to roll it thinly. As you can see, I decided to adjust a little bit more flour because mine was still very, very sticky. And now it starts mixing together and coming together almost like in one mass, a ball, a little bit easier. So that's probably gonna be enough. And I washed my hands and touched the top of it, and my hands come out clean, so it's ready. Now I like to divide the dough into 8 or 9 parts using the scale, so they are kind of the same size. I have one small one, but I'm gonna use it for the crumbs. And it's important, while you roll each layer and bake it, you keep the rest of them covered so they do not dry out. Now I dusted a little bit flour on top of the parchment paper, and I'm gonna roll it very thinly. And I usually do it on the parchment paper so I do not have to struggle removing the layer from the table. And you should aim for like a big circle, about 10 inches. And it doesn't have to be perfect because we're gonna bake it as it is, and then I'm gonna use a plate to cut the circle. You can also cut it after, or you can cut it before, but I like to do it after I bake the layers so they are more even. And it's important to pierce each layer a little bit with a fork so they do not puff up too much. I'm just gonna do that and put the rolled layer on a baking sheet, and they bake very, very fast, between 4 to 6 minutes. Once you learn how to do it quickly, you can actually roll the next layer while you bake the first one, and you can reuse the parchment paper. And once it comes out of the oven, it is important to cut out the circle right away, because once the layers cool down, they become like biscuit texture, so you won't be able to cut them out. And the scrapes, I usually keep them separately because we're gonna use them for the traditional decoration, which is a crumb basically. I just carefully use my knife without cutting the parchment paper. And here is the perfect honey cake layer. So I made 8 of this. And I usually make it one day and do the frosting the next day. So the next day, I simply add heavy whipping cream and beat it on a high speed until the soft peak form with the powdered sugar. And after that, we're gonna add sour cream. My aunt and my mom used to make this cake only with the sour cream, but our sour cream in Ukraine used to be much thicker. So, and most of the time it was homemade sour cream, so it's a little bit different frosting I use, but it's still very good and it still has that flavor and taste of sour cream like traditional honey cake. Now you can see the soft peak formed, and I'm gonna add sour cream and just mix it again on a lower speed. I also forgot to add the vanilla extract, which I just did at the very end. And now the frosting is ready, but you have to use it right away. So make it the frosting right before you assemble the cake. And now we're gonna add quite a bit of frosting between each layer. I usually add at least 3/4 of a cup because you need a lot of frosting so it gets absorbed into the layers, which gonna become soft. And you're gonna have a lot of frosting, so you're gonna have quite enough of frosting for the whole cake. To add a lot between each layer, you do the same process with all 8 layers. And I made a mistake. I made this cake on top of the plate. It is actually better to do it on a cutting board or a cake stand because when it's gonna be in the fridge, it's gonna kind of curve if you use a plate. Also had enough to cover the side and the top of the cake. Now I did blend my crumbs and I cover the whole cake on top, on sides with the crumbs. You do not have to do that, but this is just a traditional way how this cake is made. Now the hardest part is to wait until you can cut this cake because it needs to go in the fridge for about 12 but better 20 hours. And this is the next day. I'm gonna show how it looks inside. You can see how easy it is to cut because the layers became very, very soft. And I will leave all the ingredients quantities in the description. And I hope you enjoyed this recipe. See you next time.